If you are ready to transform your body, lose more fat, build more muscle using macros, you are in the right place, because in this video, I'm going to break down how to set your macros so that you can hit your goals faster and more efficiently. One of my favorite sayings is that methods are many, principles are few. Methods may change, but principles rarely do. And in this case, we're going to be diving into one of the most fundamental principles of nutrition, which is hitting your macronutrients to get the body composition that you goal that you have. We're going to touch on calories as well, but let's dive on into this, and I will share screen and we will go from there. So how to set your macronutrients for efficient fat loss and muscle gaining phases. We'll talk about when you can kind of understand when it is best to go into either a cutting or a gaining phase, when maintenance makes sense for what types of populations, what body fat percentages for men and women. So a lot of information that we'll be diving into this. Make sure real quick though, before we do, and grab the recipe book down below. You can find that down below the video, just to give you a quick little preview as to what that looks like. I'm going to share screen and show you the high protein recipe collection. So over 50 different recipes. It's going to give you a recipe key to kind of lay out exactly, what it is that you are having. Make sure that's gluten-free, dairy-free, if that's something you are needing. You've got your weekly meal planner, shopping list, and then as you get into the specific meals, you can see easily scan into MyFitnessPal. You've got serving sizes, how long it takes to make, what you need to do, and what all of that entails. Like I said, for over 50 different recipes. So without further ado, let's dive on in to this presentation on how to set your macros. So for any beginners out there, what are macronutrients? Well, I'll give a nice little definition for you. It is a substance required by a relatively large amounts by living organisms in particular. So just use the two words, nutrients. That means things that your body needs. Your body needs nutrients. And then macro, that is the big picture, big version. So it's substance required in large amounts. So you have your macronutrients. Micronutrients would be nutrients required in smaller amounts. Don't have that in here though. So real quick, macros by the numbers. When you look at the three macros that comprises really any food that we eat, it's going to have either protein, carbohydrates, or fat. I do have a little note down in the bottom that alcohol does kind of count as a fourth macro, but there's no nutrients within it. It has 7 calories per gram. So that's how you can look at a bottle of wine and have it have calories, but not have it have any macronutrients in it. There might be a little bit of carbohydrates, but within protein and carbohydrates, you have 4 calories per gram. So if you have 100 grams of protein in chicken, that is 400 calories. Same thing with carbohydrates. 100 grams of carbs in rice is 400 calories. Where it gets a little bit different is dietary fats. You're going to have 9 calories per gram. So 100 grams of fat in cheese, for example, is going to be 900 calories. And so if you ever hear someone say that fat is more calorically dense, this is why. Because you can have the same amount of food in weight, but it is higher in calories for things that are high in fat. So when animals are having, these really fatty, let's say a lion eats a really fatty animal, that's great because it's going to get more calories from that animal. A better example might be like a whale. A whale carcass is going to have a ton of blubber, a ton of fat. So that is going to be loaded. Obviously, you're going to get some protein with that as well. But I think at this point, it makes sense. Fat, more calorically dense than protein and carbohydrates. That's why you feel more full when you're having a high protein, high carb diet as well. So first thing you need to do when you are setting your macros is understand what your maintenance is. And maintenance specifically is going to be your maintenance calories. And there's really 2 different ways in which you can do this. The first one I recommend is the first one that I would do with clients. And this is really to get an awareness as to where you're at. So the first thing you're going to want to do is just track your weight and track your intake for 14 days. Weight would be on a scale. Intake would be in an app like MyFitnessPal. And then you would compare that. At the end of each week, you would see an average weight. So this average weight on the left side is 166, average calorie intake 2814. And then the week following, maybe you brought your calorie intake down. I don't know why necessarily you would do that, but maybe you saw that your weight didn't go down. So you start doing that, and then boom, 164.9, you found a deficit. I mean, I guess I do know why you would do that, but typically you want to just get a good apples to apples number so that okay, cool, this is my maintenance. Now, when we're looking at this, let me make sure, when you're looking at this, a surplus is going to be an average weight going up beyond half a pound over the course of those 2 weeks. Maintenance is anything that is less than half a pound lost, less than half a pound gained, because your body's really kind of just sitting in between a range. And then obviously a deficit is if the weight has gone down, 0.5 pounds over that period of time. It's a small deficit, but I would say it definitely is a deficit. The other thing that you can do is use a multiplier to estimate the required intake. So this activity level multiplier is a way in which you can kind of create a proxy for, okay, if someone's not that active, let's multiply this by essentially their weight. So let's say someone was 180 pounds, you would multiply someone who lives kind of a sedentary lifestyle, but maybe they do work out. Maybe you're someone who sits at a desk all day, but you do go and work out 3 or 4 days a week. Well, then it maybe would make sense to utilize this one. Typically, I would use 1.3 for smaller females. I would use 1.6 for bigger males, just because men will have more muscle. They will have a bigger frame, more mass to them. So they'll be a little bit higher on this range. But then from there, we have the estimate that your intake would be 2340 to 2880. And now if we were going to do this, we would want to set those calories at 2500, somewhere within that range, and see how the body responds. If you lost 0.2 pounds, I would say that that is maintenance. Okay. So 2 options there. One is a little bit more, I would say this is option 2 is a little bit more quicker to just say like, okay, cool, this is a rough number. I would say option 1 is definitely a little bit more accurate in terms of like, okay, cool, let's track this. Both, I would say you definitely need to look at the numbers and make data-driven decisions though. So should you build or cut first? That's typically the next question from here. You do a 1 week, ideally 2 week phase where you're just building awareness. Where are we in relation to our body maintenance and how much we are intaking versus how much we are expending? One quick note before I move on from this. If you do it over a 3-day period, can that work? Yes. But if it's a 3-day period, maybe it's the weekend, maybe it's during the week, you want to make sure that it is as apples to apples as possible. If you do this over a time period when you're hiking for 3 days, for example, it's not going to be as apples to apples as when you're sitting at your desk for 3 days and you're a lot less active over that time period. Intake may stay the same, but expenditure would be a little bit higher. So should you build or cut first? This is a quick little overview. Apologies for having this out of the way. We'll remove, oh, guess we're not removing that from the stream. There we go. So anyway, body fat strategy, and right here you have tactic is what it says right here. But what we're going to see, let's see, yeah, tactic. What we're going to see here for experienced lifters. So this is someone who's been following a progressive training plan. They're a little bit more advanced than someone who's never worked out before. If you're less than, or sorry, if you're over 16% for male, over 23% for female, then yeah, the strategy at that point would be to cut. If you are under 16% or under 23%, then the strategy would be to build. And again, this is also going to be contingent on genetics, how someone displays or retains their fat. You might be totally fine sitting at a 16% body fat because your fat is put in your glutes or it's put in an area that you don't really mind. So you're fine getting maybe a little bit fluffier, or maybe it's the opposite and your body stores in an area where you're like, yeah, I really don't like this. I start to feel fluffy around my torso. I want to be a little bit leaner. And so at that point, you can make that decision. This isn't a end all be all numbers. This isn't an end all be all range for individuals, but this is a typical guideline. So if we're going to do a cut, 35 calorie deficit for the week, 500 a day, 7 by 500 is 3,500. If we're going to build, you'd want to be in a 100 to 250 calorie surplus for each day. So that nets out to roughly 1,000 to 1,500 calorie surplus for the week. Now, if you're an experienced lifter and you find yourself in between these ranges, 8 to 16 for male, 16 to 23% for male, and you feel good about your aesthetics, you feel good about your physique, you can just sit at maintenance there. You can just continue to train, continue to get stronger, continue to focus on what makes the most sense, and that's where you would stay. If you are obese and new to exercise, that's where this gets a little bit more unique. I would say maintenance makes sense because simply exercising is going to put you in a calorie deficit. It's going to restore a little bit more normal functions to hormones, and it's going to help your hunger cues be a little bit more stable. So you'll actually find a deficit during that period, but it's not going to be because we change and manipulate nutrition. It's going to be because we've changed and manipulated other variables. If we change and manipulated nutrition and training and exercise, that might be a lot to continue to be able to maintain that for an extended period of time. So with that, I would also continue to target 0.8 grams times your body weight in protein, walk and follow a progressive overload plan. I would do that for the 5th option. We'll get to that in a second. But The 0.8 grams per body weight of protein, again, that's a guideline. If someone is 400 pounds, they might not be able to hit 0.8 grams per pound of body weight. So you would just kind of bring it down from that point. And again, this is where having someone give you or really having a coach be able to say, hey, based on your case by case basis, this is what we should do. I'm trying to provide this information based off of a few different reference points. One of the big ones is going to be the Muscle and Strength Training Pyramid by Eric Trexler. That's a big resource for this. And so you're always going to get the mean for this data. Everyone's going to have a little bit uniqueness to them. So 0.8 though, that'll help make sure that your body is being as active as possible metabolically through the thermic effect of food. And that's going to help make sure that your hunger cues are down and your body's going to be able to build a little bit more muscle with that intake. Now, someone who is, for lack of a better term, skinny fat, so you have excess fat around the torso, but you look at someone in clothes and they're relatively skinny, I would just get them training, and they're likely, because they haven't really exercised much before, going to see a body recomposition where their body is going to build muscle and lose fat simultaneously rather. With that, I would bump up protein a little bit higher. So let's say someone's 150 pounds, set them at 160, 170, and just get them training, following a progressive plan, getting them walking. They're going to get a body transformation without needing to necessarily go into a big calorie deficit. All right, now setting your macro targets. And for this, I'm going to pull up a Google sheet and show you how I would do this, in real time, using something that does a lot of the numbers for you. So if we are cutting, we're going to set calories 500 calories below maintenance. So let me show you what that would look like for an individual where their maintenance is 2,500 calories. So if we go here, boom, cool. So we are now in the Return of the Athlete tracker. So let's say this is maintenance. We'll call this name, we'll call this Paul. Their My Fitness name is Paul. The weight, let's say they're 200 pounds. And based on the multiplier, we get to a point to where this is 2,000, and we end up putting them at 2,500. I'm not going to do the math in front of y'all live, but for this, we're saying, okay, 2,500, we want to put them in a 500 calorie deficit. So we might go boom, boom, boom. And let's just skip the math. So we're there. Now, inside of each one of these cells is going to be a little bit of math. So carbs is going to be based off of these two numbers being subtracted. Your fats is based off of a formula of your D11. So that is a percentage of your total calorie intake divided by 9. Because remember, 9 calories per gram. So first thing you'd want to do is set your protein as relative to your body weight. So let's say this is 180 pounds rather. So it's a little bit easier. And we want to do 1.1. Let's just do 1.0 for easy math. Cool. 180. Now, if we are in a cut, we're going to go to stop sharing, and we're going to go back to here and pull up this stream. We want to say, okay, protein 1 to 1.2 grams of body weight. We've done that. Fat at 15 to 25% of total calories, and carbohydrates remaining. Typically, you'd want to be at minimum 0.5 gram per pound. So if we go here, we want to say, okay, fat 15 to 25%. What's with the variance? Well, it's going to be relative to how the individual already eats, what they enjoy eating, how their body responds to a higher or lower fat approach, and when they're going to eat their carbohydrates. So let's dive back into this and say, all right, we want to go to 15 to 20%. Again, you'll have access to this down below this video as well, so you can create your own document. We will share screen and pull this up again. So if we wanted to go and put this at 15%, well, we would just do 0.15. You can see that pulls the fats down to 33 grams, carbs at 245, protein stays stable. If we wanted to bump this up to 25%, we do that. Now your fats is 56, 195 for carbs, protein and calories remain stable. Make sure not to delete this section, because this is where we are getting the calories for the macros, and then we're dividing it down below in here. So that's if you want to focus on cutting. If you're like, hey, I want to go into a cut, my body fat percentage is, above 16% for males, 23% for females. You've been training, you haven't been training as much, and you do want to cut, that's where I would go. That's how I would approach that. Now, if you are in the opposite side of the camp and you want to build, actually, we'll take a quick second here. So this is an example of what a cut looks like visually, right? On the left, you have a male, high body fat percentage, Put them into a cut, they lose fat, less fat on their bodies, a lot leaner. Same thing for a female. Same thing for a male on the right? Different body shapes, but ultimately a cut is reducing body fat percentages. I don't have the specific weight for these individuals. Yes, the weight did go down on the scale, but in a cut, you're really looking at, all right, are we losing weight? But also we want to look at body fat percentage going down as well. And one quick call out on the one on the right, calories are pretty close to the one on the right, but by making a change to the macronutrients and bringing the carbs up a little bit, bringing the protein up a little bit, this guy was able to see a little bit more of a change in his body composition. So now let's go to a build, setting calories 100 to 250 calories above maintenance, protein 0.7 to 1.0 grams body weight, fat 20 to 30%, carbs remaining, carbohydrates typically will be the remaining amount. You might be asking, well, why is protein at 0.7 and to 1.0 instead of higher? Well, when you have more available calories and you have more available nutrients, the body isn't going to necessarily be in a state of cutting down and needing energy stores. So the body is much more likely to be able to hold on to and retain any protein or any muscle that it has. When you're cutting, you want to make sure that the muscle doesn't become one of the fuel sources, right? The body's going to use either blood sugar, it's going to use fat stores, or it's going to use muscle for fuel. You want to keep the protein high in a cut so that the body keeps as much of that muscle as possible. You're not really running that risk in this situation. The body has more than adequate resources to build that muscle. So we're able to move it around to something a little bit different. But let's pull into the new client tracker and show you how we would do this for a build. So we'll present slides, oops, present, share screen. There we go. Cool. So now let's say this is a 180-pound individual. They are wanting to build. And at 180 pounds, maybe they're pretty muscular. They're 12% body fat. They want to get bigger and add to their frame though. So we might say, okay, we're going to do this equals 180 times 0.9 could be an example. So we're saying their protein's at 162. I would still probably set it to 180 just simply because as soon as you start getting into the 4,000 calorie range, you end up eating a lot of carbs, and that's tough. If you can get it from protein, great. And there's nothing hurt by having 1.0. So again, it's going to be based on personal preference, but that's how you would do that. If you wanted to shift it, bring it down a little bit to like a 0.9, that's totally fine as well. Now, 20 to 30%. So this is in the range already, but if you wanted to do 20%, that's 0.2. There you go. Bring it down to 44% fat. Or if you want to bring it up to 0.3, that's fine too. 7%. No issue there. Carbohydrates are going to be adjusted whatever based off of what you do to these two, because it's going to be where we're getting our remaining. All right. So now that is building, that is cutting. Maintenance is, and I'll go over a couple quick clients here. One quick thing I want to call out, and I'll zoom in so that we can really look at these a little bit deeper. In a build phase, rather, I said cutting, I meant build. In a build phase, you're not going to see a ton of changes necessarily in the photos. You're increasing your body fat percentage. You are going to cover up a lot of the tone, defined muscle that you might see when you're a little bit more cut, but you're still seeing significant amount of progress. This is where you're looking at performance in the gym. This is where you're looking at measurements, how clothes are fitting to get a much better indication as to how you're doing. I'll get to how we track this in the future, like what a good rate of progress is. But in 20 weeks, this guy right here went from 158 to 168. His torso remained relatively the same, 31 inches above the navel, 36 actually went down below the navel, but his thigh, his arm, his chest went up. Very similar to this client. Put on 4 inches to his chest. Torso was 34 inches, 36, 37. So anytime you're in a build, you want to look at, okay, well, what is the navel? What is the torso doing? If we're able to keep that relatively same to where it was at a lower body fat percentage, but we're able to see bigger jumps in the chest, like this one went from 35 to 38.5. Joey right here put on a ton of weight in his upper body, still a very lean person. And this took him, almost 2 years, a little over 2 years, and it was kind of intermittent in how he was training. But you're going to see that with a build. This for 14 weeks from 193 to 206, the guy in the middle, that's a good rate of gain for that time frame. And keep in mind too, what is going to play a role in how quickly you build muscle is partially due to how long you've been training or how long you haven't been training. If you're new to this and you just go into a build phase, you are going to see much faster progress. I like to use the example of video games. Video games get you hooked because you are going to hit the first 20 levels very quickly. To get from level 48 to 49, 49 to 50 is a grind. So to put on 10 pounds or to put on 20 pounds is going to take a lot longer for someone who has trained much longer. And it's going to be much harder to put on muscle for someone who has been training progressively as an advanced lifter for an extended period of time. Now, one quick caveat too before I move on. This isn't 10 pounds of muscle to the guy on the left. This isn't 13 pounds of muscle to the guy in the middle. This isn't 16 pounds to the guy on the right. There is some fat accrued there, but we want to keep that as minimal as possible, which is why following this approach is going to be so beneficial and why we want to look at measurements, photos, performance in the gym, and weight to track your progress. All right, now setting calories to maintenance. So protein, 1 to 1.2 grams of body weight, fat, 15 to 25%. And so really the idea here is that you're just finding maintenance from a calorie standpoint, setting your protein at your body weight, maybe a little bit higher if you enjoy that. And it helps with satiety and cravings, but nothing really crazy in terms of how you're approaching that specific situation and scenario. And a lot of times in a maintenance phase, you're just focused on performance. You're just focused on being in the gym, lifting progressively. Your body's going to change, but you're really trying to just keep the weight stable. And if you end up losing weight because you put on more muscle, because you change your diet, you're eating a little bit cleaner, you're moving a little bit more, that can definitely happen, which happened to the guy on the right. He went down 8 pounds over 22 weeks, put on 1 inch to his chest, put on 1/2 inch to his bicep. Torso actually went down and his hips and legs went down a little bit. So probably lost a little bit of fat there. This client on the left, she just started having more protein, started progressively lifting or training progressively, and created significant amount more muscle. Body composition changed. Her abs started popping a whole lot more because she went from just doing HIIT classes and not focusing on nutrition to really leveling up, tracking macros and training in the gym, lifting heavy, not getting bulky, right? The one on the right is not bulky. That is 10 months of just lifting heavy, hitting her macros, getting her protein in, and really making sure that she's doing things as optimally as possible and leveling up. So getting close to the end, tracking progress week to week. How do we want to look at that? Well, let's dive on into that. So how is it going? This is kind of how you can gauge that. So if the strategy is cutting, you want to see 0.5 to 1 pound of your body weight a week lost. Heavier individuals can lose 1% of their body weight a week. Big call out here. If someone is 300 pounds, 1% of their body weight a week is 3 pounds. If you are 150 pounds, you are not going to see the same rate of loss as someone who has more to lose. Same with men and women. Women are smaller. Their rate of loss will be slower than men. Men are bigger. Men are going to have more body fat if they are 250 pounds versus a woman who is 180 pounds, right? Obviously, if it's 250 pounds and 250 pounds, that's a little bit more apples to apples. But I think a lot of times people can get frustrated because they don't see the progress that someone else saw. And you got to make sure that you're comparing yourself to the right things, and also make sure that you're just comparing yourself to a good rate of loss. And then to that point as well, not comparing yourself. So there's levels to this. Don't compare yourself. If you are comparing yourself, make sure you're looking at the right numbers. Don't look at Jared from Subway. That's a terrible example and not someone to compare yourself to. You also want to look at other signs. It's going to be the same for a lot of these, but weekly measurements, monthly photos, how clothes fit, performance. These are all indicators as to how you're doing. I like to say when I'm working with a client, you and I are pilots in this plane, and we use these measurements. We use the photos, we use the scale, we use clothes fitting, how you feel, performance as essentially data that we are using as feedback as to where we are in relation to the mountains, to the sea, to the ground, to other planes around us. We're just utilizing all of these instruments to help coordinate where we are going, and if we are going in the right direction, if we need to pivot, or if we need to just continue going on the right path that we are going. So by having all of these different measuring tools, we're able to see, oh, we're actually doing a great job. Or we can say, oh, based on these, let's make this adjustment. But I can't tell you how many times I've seen someone frustrated that their weight didn't really change week over week or month over month, but then their photos and measurements was completely different, right? And so the more things you track, the more things you measure, the more motivated you're also going to be because you're able to see yourself progressing in multiple areas. For building, you are going to, that needs to actually be updated. Building, you're going to want to see 0.5 to 1 or 0.5% of your body weight. I need to have this written down. Basically, for your body weight for building, 2 to 4 pounds. Yeah, that's what it is. 0.5 to 1 pound a week gained. So need to go in and edit that. I'll edit that, but it's 0.5 to 1 pound of body weight a week. This 1% does not need to be in there. So to wrap this all up, it would be 2 to 4 pounds a month added in your frame if you are in a building phase. And that's going to be contingent on your nutrition. If it's on the higher end, 4 pounds, you're probably putting on a little bit more fat. You're probably eating at slightly higher surplus. That's okay. Kind of just depends on if you want to make sure that you are building and being anabolic every single day, or if you want to make sure that you are cutting, or not cutting, rather, you want to make sure that you are staying as lean as possible throughout the build. Then maintenance, you're just basically measuring, are we in maintenance? Is the weight staying relatively the same? And then you're looking at a lot of the same things. A few things to also consider is individuals, right? Low carb can also work. If someone wants to do a more keto-based approach, that can totally work. That's going to be based on the individual, and you get into more health-specific related situations where someone needs to have a lower carb approach based on their insulin or PCOS or something like that. If you are looking at water intake, 2/3 of your body weight in ounces, it's a good place to aim at. You can also qualitatively look at your pee and just be like, is this yellow? Yeah, well, then we probably need to increase water intake. Fiber, good range is going to be 14 grams per 1,000 calories. So for males, I like to say aim for 35. Females, aim for 25. And if you see poor digestion, bring your fiber up or down based on if your stools are really runny or if you're having a really hard time passing stools. All of this doesn't work if you are not consistently tracking. So macros only work if you work them. So you're not going to just track macros 5 days a week, not track on Saturday and Sunday, and have this work as well as if you're tracking every single day and being accurate. Meal timing can definitely impact your digestion. I would not recommend putting down like 80 grams of protein and then working out. It takes protein a longer time to digest. I've made that mistake before, going for I think it was like a 10-mile run after having a bunch of bonza pasta with spaghetti meatballs. I felt like I was going to throw up, and it's because I wasn't able to digest those specific macros during that time. Had I had, honestly, like a Gatorade, I might have performed a little bit better because it was a fast burning carbohydrate. Food quality. So you can definitely get a little bit overboard on this as well. If it fits your macros is an approach that used to be really popular. Just because a Twinkie has fats and carbs in it does not make it the same as a sweet potato that has carbs in it or an avocado that has fats in it. There are high quality foods, there are low quality foods. So make sure that you're taking food quality into account here, as opposed to just being like, oh, well, I need to hit 100 carbs, so I'm just going to slam a bunch of Skittles. I would not advise that. So that is it. Leave a comment down below and check out the next video coming out on how to really track your metrics beyond just macros. And so if you've been watching this, you will know that we went and looked at a number of different things that you can track. So just to give you a little bit of a preview as to what that's going to look like, that is in this document here. How do we look at macros and nutrition while also looking at weight and steps, right? Which plays a role in total daily energy expenditure. How do we look at biofeedback and track that and use a number of different systems, technologies to be able to look at that? How do we look at training performance specifically with the Return of the Athlete app, which you should be able to get access to by this point? And we want to look at all of this as kind of like an executive dashboard as to how your fitness is going. And when we look at that and we measure as many things as possible and make data-driven decisions, what gets measured gets managed, as we mentioned early on in the beginning of this right here. Boom. Actually, that's in the next training. What gets measured gets managed. That's a preview. I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching. This is Paul Klingen on Return to the Athlete, and catch you on the next video.